Welcome to Lesson 3 in the ASP.NET MVC UI add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to improve the look of our MVC user interface. So we have out of the gate, we have a default view on, or default look with MVC. And it's not bad. I mean, it's definitely well beyond the days of a basic gray application. But that doesn't mean it's a great look. Doesn't mean that it's one you want to keep long term. And so, while I am not a design guy, I'm definitely not a guy that creates these amazing designs out of thin air. I am a guy that can use resources, and I think you can too. And so we're going to use a resource today called Boot Swatch in order to change the look of our application for free. So here I have bootswatch.com. That's bootswatch.com open. And in here, there's a number of different looks for a Bootstrap theme. Now, Bootstrap is the one of the things that the MVC application brought in, and that's a way of laying out a web application. And it's a really great tool to start from. That's where a lot of the websites you'll see today have based their design off of, is Bootstrap, because it just gives you a leg up. And so down here is a number of different, I wouldn't necessarily call them themes. They kind of are. They're a different look, but they're definitely not providing you with any additional, page layouts or design ideas in that way. And that's where a full-on theme will give you a little more full-featured ability. But with this, we're just changing how it looks. So for example, the journal. This one's great if you're having a newspaper style web page where maybe you're doing articles and posting news-like things. This is a great theme for it. It feels like a newspaper when you're reading it. And that's just based upon the font choice they use especially. And so that's a nice theme. But the theme we're going to use is down here. It's called Superhero. Why? I just kind of like this theme. Now, it's up to you if you want to use this theme, a different theme. In this page, if any one you select, it'll work the same. So if you want to say, you know what, I'd rather have darkly or flatly, not a problem. Go ahead and use that. I'm just going to use Superhero because I like the look of it a little better. And if you want, you can preview. So let's hit preview. And this is what the different sections will look like. So here's what a menu looks like. Here's what the nav bar looks like. Two different options. Here's what buttons look like. The block levels, topography, and so on and so forth. So you can look through this and say, you know what, I kind of like this or I don't. Personally, for me, I find it a little hard to look at this page and determine if it's going to look right or not. Instead, what I do is I look at one and say, you know what, that probably looks good. This is kind of what I'm looking for, or I think maybe it is. And so I'll actually apply it to my project and then look at it. Because my project already has those three template pages, the home page, the contact us page, and the about us page. And so what I can do is put this in place and then run that and just see how those pages change in their look. So there's a multiple ways to install this, but I find the easiest one is to use the drop-down arrow next to download. And this gives us a few different options, but the one we're going to use is bootstrap.css. Now, if you're going to production, and this isn't really a course on HTML and CSS, but we'll definitely touch on some things. So if you're going to production with a website, you really want to have the minified version of your CSS and your JavaScript. And that just saves on the amount of download that the client has to do in order to get your website up and running. But when you're in development, it's much easier to use the non-minified version for debugging. Because you might find, you know what, I want to change something. Well, the minified version is really hard to use to go in and change something and tweak something. And this is where we use the full version. So they provided both. The download button will download the minified, the .min version. I want the full-on bootstrap.css. So I'll click this, and it takes me to a new page, and notice the URL is /superhero/bootstrap.css. So that's the entire bootstrap.css file. I could right-click and say Save As. What I'm going to do is do a Control-A to select everything on this page. There's a lot. And I'm going to right-click on it and say Copy. Now let's copy the actual files or actual text of bootstrap.css. Then I'll come over to my project, and here I have the MVC UI open. And under Content, we're going to see bootstrap.css. Let's open that up. And that looks similar to what we had in the web page. What I'm going to do is do a Control-A to select everything and backspace once. That deletes everything in bootstrap.css. Now, normally themes will apply on top of Bootstrap, meaning they take Bootstrap and they say, well, here's our CSS, and it's a different file and it kind of overrides the bootstrap.css. In this case, we're actually changing the CSS file that came with Bootstrap. Now, if you're not familiar with all the web, you may be totally lost at this point. You're saying, what is a CSS file? What does it do? Why do I care? So let me give you a quick overview of how the web works. HTML files are the backbone of a website. That's where you'll find all the content that goes into a website. But if we use just HTML, then our websites will be plain, boring, text-based things that didn't look very good. And so we have CSS. And what CSS stands for is Cascading Style Sheets. And what that means is these are styles that are applied to our website to change the way it looks. And so it can be something as simple as changing the font, or changing the font size, or changing the colors of a certain box or a certain class that's labeled. And so the CSS allows us to make something pretty out of something really boring. If you've ever seen a website without CSS, you'll know what boring looks like. So what we're doing is we are modifying the default CSS file, the Cascading Style Sheet file, that comes with Bootstrap. So instead of the default look, we're going to replace it with a new look. So let's go ahead and paste that code in. Now the other thing to note, and that's part of the cascading in the Cascading Style Sheets, is that styles are applied in a certain order, where the most specific rule outranks less specific rules. And so that's why you're going to see certain things like this right here, where it says panel default that then has a panel heading inside it. Now, we're not going to go through all of reading CSS and learning it all. And in fact, all you really need to know at this juncture is copy and paste. And I'm pretty sure you can do that. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to have multiple style sheets and not to have these conflicts. Instead, we learn how to do conflict resolution. And the conflict resolution really comes down to most specific wins. And so that's what we're doing here is we're applying our bootstrap.css, and then we'll have more specific rules we can apply if we feel we want to modify this even further. So let's save this right now. So we have bootstrap.css. We've not changed anything else, just that one file. And now let's hit run just to see the difference that this causes. So we're going to start up our page, and immediately we see it's got that darker blue-gray background. It's got the well is gray, but it pops out nice. I like the font. I like how it pops against the gray and the blue. So that's nice. I'm not a big fan of how tiny some of this is. And we're going to change it in the future, especially this menu up here. That's just too tiny. And so we're actually going to modify that kind of right off the bat. So let's go ahead I'm going to teach you a little bit about web debugging because it's kind of important to learn when you're talking through ASP.NET. So if we're on a web page and we hit F12, it brings up the developer tools. Now, right now, these developer tools are next to my website, which actually crushes it down a little bit. But you could use this ellipsis up here and say instead you want to undock this and instead have it float, which is nice. Here to modify things. So these developer tools allow us to actually modify and change in line how things work, which is great, but it also shows us why things are the way they are. And so the way we do this is, let's expand this window to the whole window just so I have a little more space and it's not quite so crushed down. Notice every time I mouse over this, it changes and it flashes and it does all the rest. That's because it's actually highlighting and telling me you're currently over this section. So I'm over body, well, that's everything in here. And so it can be a little bit distracting at times, but it can be rather helpful as well. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the font size of these 3 items. They're way too small. So I'm going to click on this little icon right here. Now I'm using Chrome, and so it may be different if you're using Firefox or Internet Explorer, but essentially what you're looking for is the item selector. Okay, in this case, it's in the upper left-hand corner of my developer tools. I have this little window with an arrow. If I select that, it turns blue. And now if I mouse over anything, it shows me a whole bunch of information. Two different things. Now, with this selector highlighted, I can come up to Home. And notice how it's got the border around it, that's a margin, and then it's highlighting the actual word Home. If I click on that, it'll actually take me, notice on the right-hand side, it takes me to where that is in the code. And it says it's inside of, that's actually an anchor tag, an A, and then it's inside of a list item, inside an unordered list. Okay, so I can keep going up if I want to figure out where all its parents are, or I can look at the element itself. In this case, I want to look at the element itself. The thing that I am concerned about is the font size. Now, let's actually make this a little bigger so you can see it. It's going to crush down my web page, but that's okay. Notice on the right-hand side, I have styles. That's looking at the cascading style sheets. And that's important because it allows us to see which style sheets are applied to this element. Because remember, they cascade. There's multiple that could apply. And there's actually multiple inside of one style sheet, multiple different things that could apply to the same element. And so here it says, okay, here's what's been applied. Go in our CSS file. And that's going to save us a whole lot of looking. Because who wants to look through 5,000 lines of a CSS file to find the right one? So we can scroll down here and look for the font size if we want. So you can scroll down here and look. And right down here, inherited from, it says font size 12px. Now, we can tell this is being applied here because it does not have a strike through. Notice this right here, that strike through, because this has been overridden by something more specific. And so in this case, there is nothing more specific than this font size, which is of size 12. Now, if we wanted to, we could come up here and go to element.style and actually add a new style and apply it directly to this specific element. What that would do for us is it would apply it at the most specific level and allow us to override anything else. And so I could actually say, I want font-size to be 18px. Notice how the home on the left over here has already changed to be much, much bigger. But about and contact have not. That's because I've applied it to this specific element. That's not what I want to do, but that is an option for other things. So I'm going to go ahead and back out of that. And instead, I'll come down to the font size down here and see that, first of all, let's figure out a different font size for this. So I'll select the 12px and say, you know what? Let's try 16. And notice how home and about and contact have all changed their size. And that's a better size. I like that a little more. And so I want that change to stick. The problem is if I refresh this page right now, this change goes away. So how do I make this change permanent? Well, I go to bootstrap.css and look at line 8194. Now it does have a link here that would take me to that file in the source code, but it's only for debugging purposes in this current session. So instead, I'll look for line 8194 in that file. So let's scroll up. Notice the line numbers here, very important. 8194. And that's the .navbar section. And notice inside here is actually 4 different rules for CSS. One of those rules is font size is 12 pixels, 12px. And so we can change this to say 16px. If I save that and I come back over to my page and I refresh, notice it's still the larger size. I still have it selected over here. I can come down to the bottom and now it says font size is 16px. It's kept that new size because I've refreshed. Just to show how it's true, I could change this to be 26 instead. That'd be massive. But if I hit refresh, they go back to 16. All right. So this section over here on the right with the styles, when you're selecting a selected item, is very important in figuring out why something is styled the way it is. If you're saying, I still can't find font size in here, I'm not sure which one applies, whatever, you can come over to the next tab, this is again in Chrome, and say Computed. And Computed tells you what all different styles have been applied based upon the actual item that has been changed. So for example, font size, again alphabetized, which is nice, font size is right here. If I select it, let's expand this out a little bit, it says there's actually 3 different places that could have been applied. The most general is at the HTML page level, and that's 10px. The next specific is at the body level, and that's 15px. The next most specific, and the one that's actually applied, notice the strike throughs in the first 2, if you can see that. And let's actually zoom in a little bit just to see. There we go, that's a little better. So you can see the strike throughs in the first 2 because they're the most general. The most specific is the .navbar at 16px. And if we scroll over, that's where it's found in Bootstrap. Notice the other 2 also have locations in Bootstrap, and they're at different places in the file. And so if you want to change a little more general one, you would go to this location right here, the 1411. That's the line number. Or the one for the whole page in general, it's at 1406. And so with that knowledge, you can very easily find what you're looking for, go in and make the change. So that's a quick way of going. It's the Computed tab, find the item that's been changed, and then figure out where it's been changed. Now, again, one of the tips that I do is I always make the change first in this section so I can see it and go, yep, that's what I want. And then I make the change in my actual CSS file, refresh the page to make sure I did it right, and life is good. So for now, that changes our headers. That's great. The About page looks okay. The Contact page looks okay. I know there's more to be changed as far as font size, but I believe that comes in with the forms. And so I'll wait to change that until we've seen a form and seen where it's something we just don't like. In the meantime, we can close out of the developer tools. So we can see different versions of it. See if we can actually get one that has a better immediate live preview. This one has a nice live preview. So this is the Inspinia dashboard. Notice, it's got some nice features like this little box in the corner. It's got mail, and it's got a little pop down, and all the rest. That's the same Bootstrap that we have in our ASP.NET MVC application. So with that, you can do all this fun stuff. Now it's more JavaScript, it's more plugins and add-ins. This stuff doesn't come native necessarily, but it's all built upon that same Bootstrap. Now, I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm not saying you have to buy something. I'm just saying, for me personally, when I'm doing development and I'm doing it for a production environment, the very first thing I do is I come here and say, give me a look that'll work with Bootstrap. And let's find something that fits what I'm trying to do, and I'll modify it from there. And so like I said, $16, $18. There's some, $9. There's some pretty cheap ones. There's some a little more expensive, but at the end of the day, if you're doing something like this where maybe you're doing, a stock tracker for an investment firm, well, $27 shouldn't be a big deal. Because if they're tracking stocks and they're making money off this, then it's worth $27 of investment just to get that nice look to it. So that's just, kind of some free advice, wrapbootstrap.com. I don't make any commission off that. I just thought it'd be interesting for you to see. But for the free stuff, Boot Swatch is a great place to change that theme very, very easily, like I showed you, and just give it a little more professionalism, a little more of a different feel than that standard out of the box. Okay? With that, we've finished making that application of our first change to MVC. We've changed the theme, changed how it looks, and made it just a little bit more professional. So in our next video, we're actually going to start making changes to code, both the HTML as well as the C# code behind it. And so you don't want to miss that. All right? I'll see you in the next video.